If you were watching the news yesterday, or even just scrolling through your feed late last night, the world looked like a completely different place.
No, completely.
We were staring down the barrel of a massive trade war between the U.S. and Europe. Tariffs were set to kick in on February 1st, and there was this looming, very real tension about Greenland.
It was incredibly tense. I think looming actually puts it mildly. There were genuine concerns, in Brussels and Copenhagen about military posturing.
Right.
The rhetoric coming out of Washington regarding acquiring Greenland had moved from theoretical to something feeling much more operational.
Exactly. And then this morning, Wednesday, January 21st, 2026, we wake up, check the headlines, and the script is completely flipped.
A total reversal.
The tariffs are off, the military threats are gone, and suddenly everyone is talking about something called the Cyprus model.
It is a fascinating pivot. What we're seeing is a classic example of geopolitical brinkmanship resolving into a very specific, historically nuanced compromise.
It's a solution that almost nobody saw coming.
Except perhaps a few trading desks, which we'll get to later.
So today in the deep dive, we're going to get into the weeds of this framework agreement.
Yeah.
We need to understand what actually happened between President Trump and NATO, why the markets are suddenly popping champagne, and why, and this is the important part, why the people actually living in Greenland are absolutely furious.
That is the crucial part of the story. You have a solution that works for the superpowers, it works for the stock market, but it is creating a significant constitutional crisis on the ground in the Arctic.
But let's start with the breaking news. What exactly was enough today? Because up until breakfast time, I thought the U.S. was threatening to buy the island or else.
So the shift happened after a pretty high-stakes meeting between President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
Okay.
Following that, Trump posted on Truth Social and gave an interview to CNBC. The headline is that he has agreed to a framework for future cooperation regarding Greenland and the Arctic.
And the immediate takeaway for the average person wondering about the price of, cheese next month.
The immediate takeaway is that the tariffs on Europe, those 25% tariffs that were supposed to hit on February 1st, they're canceled. They are officially off the table.
That is huge. We were talking about a potential recession trigger there.
It is massive. Yeah. And perhaps even more importantly, in terms of global stability, the president explicitly ruled out the use of military force. He told CNBC he doesn't think the U.S. will move arms to take control.
So the threat of a hostile takeover or a kinetic event is gone.
Gone.
Okay, so no trade war, no invasion. But the U.S. didn't just walk away empty-handed, right? I mean, the administration has been incredibly vocal about securing the Arctic. They didn't just drop it.
No, they certainly didn't. The demand evolved. And this is where it gets really interesting. The agreement isn't a purchase of the entire island.
Right.
Instead, they have settled on a transfer of sovereignty over specific small pieces of land on Greenland.
Wait, let's pause on that. The U.S. is getting, like patches of Greenland?
Correct. The reports from the New York Times and NATO officials all describe it as the Cyprus model.
The Cyprus model. Break that down for us. Because when I think of the Arctic, I don't usually think of a sun-soaked Mediterranean island.
Right. It's a legal analogy, not a climate one. So in Cyprus, there are these areas called the sovereign base areas Akrotiri and Dhekelia.
Okay.
They're military bases used by the United Kingdom. But legally, they are not just bases on Cypriot soil. They are British overseas territory. They are sovereign British land sitting within the island of Cyprus.
I see. So this isn't like a lease where you pay rent to the landlord. In the Cyprus model, the UK actually owns that dirt. It's their territory.
Exactly. And that appears to be the blueprint here. Denmark has agreed to transfer sovereignty of specific small plots of land on Greenland to the United States for the purpose of military bases.
That is a very specific needle to thread.
It is. It satisfies the U.S. demand for a permanent foothold without requiring Denmark to sell the entire semi-autonomous country.
It's essentially saying, I won't buy your house, but I want to own the guest room. And I want the deed to it.
That is a fairly accurate analogy. Trump called it a permanent long-term agreement. And crucially, the deal includes U.S. participation in Greenland's mineral rights.
Ah, the minerals. We knew that was coming.
It's always part of the equation in the Arctic. But the stated primary goal, at least from the NATO side, is security. They want to ensure that Russia never gains an economic or military foothold in Greenland.
And by making these bases sovereign U.S. territory, they're essentially locking the door.
And throwing away the key. You don't have to worry about a future Greenlandic government leasing a port to Russia if the port is already American soil.
So who came up with this? Because this Cyprus model feels like a very diplomatic, deep-cut solution. It doesn't sound like something that usually comes out of a heated rally speech or a trade dispute.
You're right. It's very technocratic. According to sources familiar with the discussions, the architect of this deal is Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General.
The former Dutch Prime Minister.
The same. He is considered to be quite close to Trump, or at least knows how to work with him effectively. He reportedly proposed this concept as the compromise.
It's clever. It gives everyone a way to save face.
It allows the president to claim a win-expanding U.S. territory and securing the Arctic while allowing Denmark to avoid a trade war and the humiliation of selling the whole island.
I want to step back for a second, though. We're talking about new bases or transferring sovereignty. But you and I have discussed this before. The U.S. isn't exactly a stranger to Greenland. We're already there.
We are, and that context is vital to understanding why this is such a change. The U.S. has maintained a military presence in Greenland since World War II. The centerpiece of that is the Pituffik Space Base.
Which used to be called Thule, right?
Yes, until recently.
Yeah.
And to give you a sense of where this is, it is remote. It's about 932 miles north of Nuuk, the capital. It's 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle.
That is really up there. That is not a casual deployment.
It is an extreme environment. Currently, it hosts about 150 U.S. troops, but its strategic value is it's immense. It's a critical node in the U.S. missile warning and space surveillance network.
Right. If a missile were launched over the pole, Pituffik is one of the first places to see it.
It's the eyes of the American missile defense system.
So if we are already there, and we have been there since the 40s, what actually changes with this new deal? Why do we need the Cyprus model if we already have the base in the radar?
It comes down to the legal status. Under the 1951 Defense Agreement, which formalized the U.S. presence under NATO, the U.S. operates there, but it is Danish soil.
Okay, so we're tenants.
Precisely. In fact, there is a visual detail that represents this. The 1951 agreement requires the Danish flag to fly over the base.
Oh, that's interesting.
The U.S. flag can fly alongside it, but the Danish flag must be there to acknowledge Danish sovereignty.
So it's a constant reminder, you are guests here.
Exactly. And this new framework agreement changes that dynamic fundamentally. We are moving from operating on Danish soil with permission to this is now sovereign U.S. territory.
That is a massive shift.
It is. It's a massive shift in international law and political symbolism. It means the Danish flag comes down over those specific plots.
It sounds like it. It's the difference between renting an apartment and owning a condo in the same building.
Sure.
One gives you a lot more permanence.
And you can renovate the kitchen without asking. And control access. That's the key.
So let's talk about how this actually got across the finish line. Because we know Trump and Rutte were the high-level guys. But who is actually hashing this out?
President Trump stated that the negotiations will be led by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and a special envoy, Steve Witkoff.
J.D. Vance has actually been there, hasn't he?
He has. He visited the Pituffik Space Base back in March of 2025 with the delegation. So there is some on-the-ground familiarity there. He's seen the infrastructure firsthand.
And clearly, the markets seem to think this team pulled it off. I was looking at the numbers this morning. Everything is green. The anxiety premium just vanished.
The market reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. And it's interesting, if you look at the analysis from JP Morgan, their trading desk actually predicted this exact outcome.
Really? They call the Cyprus model. That seems like a specific bet to make.
Well, they predicted a negotiated settlement that would expand the U.S. security and economic presence while leaving Denmark with overall sovereignty. They called it the middle path.
What were the other alternatives they were looking at?
They viewed an outright invasion as a tail risk.
Tail risk. That's finance speak for unlikely but catastrophic, right?
Exactly. And they noted that it would be catastrophic. JP Morgan's analysis literally said an inversion would dissolve NATO faster than melting ice.
Wow.
It would have shattered the Western alliance, so the bankers were betting on survival.
Right, and on the flip side, they thought an outright purchase was unlikely because neither Denmark nor Greenland would ever agree to it.
Correct. So financially speaking, this weird, complex sovereignty transfer was the only logical outcome that avoided disaster. The market loves certainty, and this deal provides it.
So the bankers are happy. The U.S. administration is happy. What about the Danes? I mean, they were facing tariffs that would have crippled their economy. They must be popping bottles, too.
There is a palpable sense of relief in Copenhagen, certainly, but it's a complicated relief. The Danish Foreign Minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, spoke to TV2 today. His quote was quite telling.
What'd he say?
He said the day ended better than it started.
Talk about an understatement. Like, I woke up thinking I was getting fired, and I just got a demotion.
He noted, "This morning we faced a president not ruling out force. Now he says he won't." He calls it a silver lining.
It's like being told you're not losing your house, you just have to give up the garage. You're just happy to still have the house.
That is a fair assessment. Mikkel Rundel-Olsen, a researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies, called it a decisive new development and noted there is cautious optimism. They avoided the worst-case scenario.
Okay, so Copenhagen is wiping sweat off their brow. But here is where it gets complicated. Because Greenland is not just a piece of property owned by Denmark. It's a self-governing territory with its own people, its own parliament. How are they reacting to news that parts of their land are being traded away?
This is the other side of the coin. While Denmark is relieved, Greenlandic politicians are furious, and the primary reason is exclusion.
They weren't in the room.
According to the reports, no. The agreement was discussed by NATO and Trump, but Greenlandic officials claim they were completely bypassed.
That seems incredibly risky, considering it's their land.
It is. Ayuja Chemnitz, a prominent Greenlandic member of parliament, posted on Facebook calling it total absurdity. Her exact words were, "NATO has absolutely no mandate to negotiate anything without us."
No mandate. That is strong language. That's a direct challenge to the legitimacy of the deal.
It is. Another MP, Kuno Fenker, expressed deep dissatisfaction that Greenland was not a direct participant. You have to understand the dynamic here. Greenland has spent decades working toward more independence from Denmark.
Right.
They have their own government, the Naalakkersuisut, and now suddenly Denmark and NATO are carving out pieces of their land to give to a third party.
It sounds like a flashback to the colonial era. Big powers drawing lines on a map without asking the people who live there.
That is exactly how it is being perceived in Nuuk. It highlights a massive disconnect. Denmark and the U.S. solved a trade and security dispute, a macro problem. But in doing so, they have potentially ignited a constitutional crisis within the Kingdom of Denmark.
So what does this actually mean for the deal? Can Denmark even do this? Can they legally transfer sovereignty of Greenlandic land without Greenland saying yes?
That is the billion-dollar question. Technically, under the Danish constitution, foreign affairs and defense are still controlled by Copenhagen. That is the leverage Denmark has. But
the Self-Government Act of 2009 gives Greenland significant say over its own resources and land use.
So we are heading for a legal showdown.
Almost certainly. If the U.S. starts building fences around these new sovereign zones and saying this is now America, and the local Greenlandic government says we never agreed to this, you have a recipe for significant local conflict.
So to just summarize for a moment, the framework is agreed to between the U.S. and NATO Denmark. Trump says it's permanent. NATO says it secures the Arctic.
And the immediate threat of tariffs is gone. But implementing this, that is going to be the hard part.
Let's connect this to the bigger picture. Why is the U.S. pushing so hard for this now? We mentioned Russia, we mentioned minerals, but is there something else driving this urgency?
It's the convergence of climate change and great power competition. We are seeing a race for the Arctic. As the ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up, new resource deposits are becoming accessible.
And Russia's been very active.
Russia has been militarizing its Arctic coast aggressively for a decade. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state, which is a bit of a stretch, geographically speaking. Beijing isn't exactly near the North Pole.
It is a stretch, but it shows their intent. The U.S. realized it was falling behind. Patufic is great, but it's one base, and under the old rules, it was just a rental. By securing these new sovereign areas, the U.S. is essentially trying to future-proof its dominance in the high north.
They aren't just renting space anymore.
They are planting the flag. Literally.
And the mineral rights part. Trump mentioned participation. Why is that so critical?
Greenland holds some of the world's largest deposits of rare earth metals. These are the materials you need for batteries, for fighter jets, for guidance systems.
Your iPhone.
For your iPhone. Currently, China dominates that supply chain globally. If the U.S. can secure direct access to Greenland's deposits through this sovereignty deal, it's a massive strategic win against China.
So it's a two-front win for Washington. Checkmate Russia on security, checkmate China on resources.
On paper, yes. It is a masterstroke of strategic planning. But again, strategies on paper have to survive reality on the ground.
And the reality is a population that feels betrayed.
Precisely. You cannot extract minerals without infrastructure, and you cannot build infrastructure easily in a hostile political environment. You need roads, you need power, you need workers.
Right.
If the Greenlandic government refuses to issue permits for the roads leading to the U.S. base, or if the local population protests the construction, things could get very messy very quickly.
It really highlights the tension between grand strategy, the stuff discussed in boardrooms and NATO summits, and the actual rights of people.
That's the core tension of the 21st century Arctic. It's not just a chessboard of empty ice. People live there. They have a culture, a government, and rights.
So where do we go from here? The tariffs are off for February 1st. What's the next date to watch?
We should watch for the formalization of this treaty. How exactly do they define the small pieces of land? Is it just the existing footprint of Patufic expanding? Or are we talking about new locations?
And the reaction from the Greenlandic parliament.
The Nazis are too. Yes. If they vote to reject this, it puts Denmark in an impossible position.
Copenhagen is stuck between the White House and Nuuk.
A rock in a hard place. Or perhaps an iceberg in a hard place.
Fair enough. But for the listener, the key takeaway is that the immediate crisis is averted. The global markets can breathe. Your imported goods from Europe aren't going to jump 25% in price next month.
Which is good news for everyone's wallet. It prevents an inflationary spike that nobody wanted.
It is. But the map of the world has effectively changed today. The United States has expanded its sovereign territory into the Arctic. That is a historic shift.
It really is. It's one of those days where history turns a page. It establishes a new precedent.
And it validates the Cyprus model as a tool for modern diplomacy. We might see this applied elsewhere. Sovereignty is becoming flexible.
That is a fascinating thought, flexible sovereignty. It suggests that in the future, borders might not be as rigid as we think.
Well, we have covered a lot, from the brink of a trade war to a historic land deal. The U.S. gets its unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Arctic permanently. Denmark keeps its economy safe. And NATO breathes a sigh of relief.
It's a win-win-win for the powers that be.
But not necessarily for everyone. And I think that's where we need to leave it today. We've seen the headlines, we've seen the market rally, but here's the provocative thought I want you to walk away with today. This deal satisfies Washington, it satisfies Brussels, and it saves Copenhagen. But how do you enforce a permanent sovereignty deal over land when the people living next door say they were never asked?
That is the question. The map has changed, but the political ice is likely to get much thinner.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll keep watching the North.
Stay curious.